I would like to welcome our next presenters in our Community Spotlight segment, program leaders who will be sharing about work being done on the community and individual level to address social isolation and loneliness. We will first hear from Risa Wilkerson, Executive Director at Healthy Places by Design, and Will Crary, Associate Program Manager at the Prevention Institute. Then we will hear from Kasley, CEO and founder of Social Health Labs, alongside Dyah, community organizer, digital designer, artist, and recipient of a Social Health Labs Microgrant. Thank you for being here. And Risa, I will first turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Jillian. I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Can you hear me, Jillian?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay, thank you. So pleased to be here with all of you and sharing this time to talk about socially connected communities. And what we want to do is, I'll take just a few minutes to share about a report that Healthy Places by Design was co-created and how it came to be. And then we'll be talking about some community examples. So in 2020, we convened a group of about 60 practitioners, leaders serving diverse populations in equally diverse settings, who co-created a set of resources, the report you see on the screen, and 2 action guides. This was as a result of a series of conversations where we talked about the difficulty of addressing social isolation during COVID-19, especially, when all of the gathering places that are typically the antidotes to social isolation had been closed, and how social isolation was being discussed and addressed almost primarily at that point from an individual lens. We've heard throughout the day, yesterday and today, how that is changing, and we're super grateful for that. What we did together was talk about how could we address the root causes of social isolation at a very local level. And together we created 5 recommendations. These recommendations are intended only as starting points to generate conversation and ideas for addressing social isolation from a sector level and across in a place-based situation. So you can see on the screen that we came up with 5 recommendations. And our hope is that these recommendations and the report and guides will inspire and equip all readers to really intentionally redesign community level systems to support meaningful social connections. So you can see the first 3 there are sector-based. The first one looks at public spaces, the second are transportation systems, and the third, housing environments. The latter 2 are really looking at practices and norms that we believe should be integrated no matter how you're addressing the issue. So inclusive practices and community-led solutions, as well as social connectedness as a community norm. Why did we choose these first 3 sectors and not other sectors? Primarily because we wanted to have, think about this from housing being an anchor point of our lives, and knowing that when we walk outside of our homes, we immediately encounter the transportation network, and very shortly thereafter, the common spaces where we can come together with folks that we know or even don't know as well. We know that our public spaces and our transportation networks connect us to all the other determinants of health, like healthcare systems, social services, education, and workplace environments, and more. So that's why we started here. And again, this report is a, idea generating, we hope, an inspiring kind of report where you can think about how this could look in your own community. Lastly, I want to mention that the report has some guiding principles. And so we based everything written in here on the idea of asset-based approaches, recognizing and honoring history and historic and community culture, and also equity and inclusion. So everything you'll see in here was generated and thought about and written about from those lenses. If you haven't already read the report, I hope you do so, and that between the report and the examples that you're about to hear, the ideas will begin to flow for how you can address social isolation in your community. I'll pause there because I'd love to get into some community examples and invite Will to join the screen, and we can go to next slide.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Risa. Hello, everyone. My name is Will Crary. I work with Prevention Institute, and I'm really excited for this opportunity because this report hits home for me as someone who has benefited from public basketball courts, thoughtfully planned bike lanes, and in a past life, I was a farmer's market manager. So really excited by this report. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Making Connections, which is an initiative that Prevention Institute helped design and coordinate, a 5-year community of practice with 13 coalitions, multi-sector coalitions across the country, very diverse geography, diverse organizational partners in each of the 13 coalitions, and different populations of focus as well. So we intended this work along with the foundation Movember, who guided this project, to impact the mental health and well-being of men and boys with specific prioritization of populations that experience high levels of trauma. And along with high rates of trauma, we found that a major risk factor that determined mental health outcomes were these notions, really limited notions of masculinity that socialize men and boys towards isolation. And so the principles underpinning the Making Connections initiative align really closely with the 5 recommendations from this report. And I especially want to highlight the last 2 about community-led solutions and connectedness as a norm, both of which were driving values, not just of the outcomes and strategies of these 13 coalitions, but also the assessment and the planning phases. So in those early assessment phases, the first year of the work, we encourage the coalitions to understand that the underlying causes of disconnection, underlying causes of trauma, the roots of mental health challenges were extraordinarily important, like those first 3 recommendations we see in this report. And we wanted destigmatization of mental illness to be a big piece of the work, but not just on an individual level. And so we were supporting the coalitions identify community level factors that support connection with their peers, connection with their community, and connections with their culture. So really thinking about changing the environment and changing structures, not just changing people. And so on the next slide, I'm going to get into 3 different examples here. This first one is in San Diego, California, and the San Diego Coalition was led by a group called United Women of East Africa Support Team. And along with their community partners, they are a pillar in the City Heights neighborhood of San Diego, which is home to the largest population of Somalian refugees in California. And so in the simplest terms, what they try to do is support a thriving East African community. And in doing this, they've reflected on the collective trauma of leaving their home countries and how that's created disconnection from the social, disconnection from the cultural and economic opportunities that aren't immediately available in their new communities. And so they prioritize social connection and addressing mental health equity after seeing too many young men in their community either die by suicide, using substances to cope with their pain, or brushing shoulders with gangs that presented opportunities for connection, opportunities for financial stability that we know are critical for thriving young people, but otherwise may not have been structurally supported in the community. And of course, all of this is connected to a lack of opportunity rooted in structural inequities, systems of oppression, racist policies that have led to this concentrated disadvantage. And so one example of the natural opportunities for connection in their community are the mosques. And so they convened faith leaders to support them address post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and suicidality, really to push back against social norms of ignoring stress, ignoring trauma that many of them have experienced, but moreover, supporting the faith community see its role in strengthening connection as a public health and as a mental health strategy. And one of the most meaningful opportunities for connection that we identified in their work is presented when the young men came together to support a strategic planning process, which you see in that photo on the left there. And while it started as and they decided that they would create a hub for young men to come together And it became a hub where they could convene to do leadership opportunities, but they were also authoring op-eds. They were presenting on community resilience at national conferences and supporting community demonstrations like the one you see there. So connection as this idea of collective efficacy and having the opportunities and resources to take action together. And on the next slide, I'm going to try to move quickly here because I have 3 that I really want to share with you all. Really quickly, just to say that a similar hub was created on a community college campus in Kankakee, a different population that experiences high rates of trauma. They were focusing on veterans and veteran students specifically. And so veteran students came together because they were realizing that campus could feel alienating for them, not feeling a sense of belonging, feeling isolated from peers who maybe weren't clear on what experiences they had before school and being a part of a community that wasn't nurturing to their strengths. And so this was a particularly important project because we know that veterans experience suicidality at a higher rate than a lot of other populations. And so they participated in some research and strategic planning on their campus that really was led by the student veterans, where they identified the need for a safe place for them to come together that required their ingenuity, their lived experience to determine what would be the best opportunity for them on campus to feel connected. And so ultimately they got to make a lot of decisions around what elements went into this student center. But what was so amazing is that what started as a one-off effort to generate connection on campus transformed into really system-wide change on the college level, where policies were being shifted to be more inclusive, not just of veteran students, but of BIPOC students and other historically excluded and marginalized groups. And this last example is maybe the one that resonates the most with this report because it speaks directly to that second recommendation to prioritize connection in transportation systems. And so the Making Connections Coalition in Albuquerque is led by an organization called Together for Brothers, which is a community organization led by young men of color. And so starting in 2016, the young men of color actually led a community organizing effort to advocate for transit equity. And they chose to focus on this public transportation topic after doing a transit audit and a health impact assessment, which you see on the left there. They got to create very cool zines and infographics. So like the young men in San Diego, part of this effort was about the collective efficacy and the opportunity to make substantial change in their community. And so they recognize that a lot of the families and young men of color in their community are transit dependent, not only for everyday needs, but it would impact their mental well-being as well, because transportation, safe and affordable transportation were a necessary means for financial stability, as well as one young man was citing how without public transportation, he wouldn't be able to stay connected with his grandmother. And I thought that was really sweet. That resonates with me. And so after participating in public hearing meetings, advocating with other city groups, and partnering with the mayor's office, they actually secured free youth bus passes for all Albuquerque residents under 18. And this is something that they're going to try to extend to the entire city. So the advocacy is continuing, and we see that these young men, when given the opportunity to lead and to envision what their community can look like, can really affect positive change that impacts connection. And this is why I love this report so much, because the recommendations can really support other communities in understanding how to prioritize connection in a way that reflects health equity and racial justice. And I can maybe pause there and pass it back to Risa.
Thank you, Will. What I'm hearing are a number of things that say that safe spaces are really important, that those spaces need to be co-created with the folks who really need to use those or want to use those, so that we're sure that we design them in a way that meets needs and helps people to feel welcome. I'm also hearing that this is a virtuous cycle. Once people feel welcome, they feel seen and heard for who they are, then they're more likely to engage. And the more engaged they are, the more inclusive it feels and the more social connections they have. And that, you truly, when we create safe and social spaces for everyone, all people benefit. Thank you so much for those examples, Will.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to this space.
And now it's my honor to turn the Zoom microphone over to Kasley Killam.
Thank you so much, Risa and Will, and thank you to everyone at the Coalition and Foundation for facilitating this conversation and for the opportunity to share some examples of alleviating loneliness at community and individual levels. So the first example that I'd like to share, if we go to the next slide, is from the Community Living Campaign. This is a nonprofit that was founded in 2007, whose mission is to help older adults and people with disabilities to age and thrive in San Francisco. I've had the honor of being involved with the Community Living Campaign as a board member for the past 4 years, and we lead a variety of different initiatives: community building events, technology, access and literacy training, food delivery programs, advocacy, and much more. One of the initiatives in particular that I wanted to spotlight today is our award-winning Community Connectors program. The goal of this program is to turn strangers into neighbors and neighbors into friends, which I absolutely love. It was one of the reasons that I was drawn to the organization a few years ago. So in 13 neighborhoods throughout the city, as you can see on the map here, we have different community connectors who are local residents who coordinate a range of virtual and in-person activities, as well as outreach for older adults and people with disabilities in the community. If we go to the next slide, to give a bit more detail on this, some of the programming that's involved is offered in multiple languages to meet the needs of different residents, and it ranges quite widely. So the activities are related to exercise, nutrition, writing, art, history, music, volunteering, and much more. And during the pandemic, like many organizations, we had to really pivot. Most of our programming before that was in person, but we were able to offer over 100 hours each month of virtual and in-person activities where safe. We got really creative with new ways to stay in touch, like walk-in waves, wellness calls and visits, mailing out different resources and activity calendars by both mail and email, and so on. And I think what's really important to note about the Community Connectors program is that all of the programming related to this is developed for community members by community members, right? This is all very grassroots, it's volunteer-led, it's hyper-local for the neighborhoods that these residents live in. And the Community Connectors themselves are neighbors. They live in those neighborhoods and are taking action and initiative to connect people locally. Even if you go back to the foundation of Community Living Campaign, our very founders were local residents and advocates who saw a need and make it happen. So the solutions that have come out of this are hyper-local and really tailored to the needs of local people. If we go to the next slide, like was talked about yesterday and earlier today as well, I think it's really important to be generating evidence and data to show the effectiveness of programs like this. And so I'm pleased to report that as a result of the community building programming that we lead, 84% of our participants know more neighbors who they feel comfortable asking for help if they need. 93% report that they are less isolated, and 100% of our participants feel more engaged with their community. So we're really proud of these numbers. We've seen over the last decade and more the impact of this community program, and we would love to partner more with researchers. I think bridging some of the data that we're able to see with boots on the ground in the community and working together with academia to make sure that we're sharing those insights and feeding in a bi-directional way, I think is really important. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to also share an example of an individual effort to alleviate social isolation and loneliness. So as you can see here, this is a monthly microgrant program run by my organization, Social Health Labs. So with support from the Wellbeing Trust, earlier this year in January, we launched this program to support community builders across the country. So each month we give out $1,000 to an individual who has an idea to connect people in their local neighborhood, but maybe needs a little bit of support to make that happen and to get that off the ground. So Social Health Labs is really all about experimentation with connection. So we use language like you see here, belonging biologist, connection chemist, friendship physicist, to kind of tie into that theme and really have fun with this idea. So if we go to the next slide, since launching in January, we've awarded 1 microgrant each month to the individuals that you see here. And their projects are quite diverse and really creative and interesting. They include creating a shared community garden, hosting craft making gatherings, making supportive cards for kids at local hospitals, and even building a picnic table and benches in a public space for people to gather. So really creative and unique to each of these communities. The individuals themselves are also quite diverse in age. You can see Sydney there in the center, who's 7 years old and is leading a project in her neighborhood. They're also diverse in race, ethnicity, background, location, and many other dimensions. But the really common theme is that each of these individuals feels inspired to take action in their local neighborhoods and to build relationships in a way that's really meaningful to that place. And I'm very pleased to share that we have one of the microgrant winners, Dyah Miller from Ohio, here today to share more about her project. So Dyah, I'd love to invite you on, and we can go to the next slide as well. All right, so Dyah, to start off, tell us a little bit about your neighborhood. You live in Norwood, Ohio. Tell us about the history there and what it's like living there.
Hi everyone, I'm Dyah Miller. So Norwood is located in the city of Cincinnati, so it's a city within a city. It's a walkable community with a central location in the metropolitan area of Cincinnati, but it's also your typical Midwestern town. You know, it used to be a prosperous middle-income community until companies left the city around 1970s. So it had changed the way the city is run for the last 5 years. Improvements have been very slow in our cities and parks. So yeah, that's where Norwood is. And I've been here for 8 years. A lot of people are like our family. We are new in Norwood, but some people have been here for a while. We have a cluster of Middle Eastern immigrants in the northern part of the city as well.
Great, thank you so much, Dyah. And so tell us a little bit about the project that you've been running with support from the Microgrant and kind of what the inspiration for it was.
So my project is building an inclusive map for Norwood. It will be included in the welcome bag. The idea of a welcome bag came from a community forum that we started about in 2019. Right now, it's its own nonprofit organization called Norwood Together. I had such a great experience here as an immigrant and a new community member, and I just wanted to share that with other new people in Norwood. How do we communicate the things that this town has to offer, not just its bad reputation? So that's what the welcome bag is. A neighbor would be asking for a welcome bag for their neighbor. And what's in it, it's information of what's going on in the city, services, events. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we had masks also in it. So I've been thinking about adding, how do we make the welcome bag better? Where can these new neighbors meet their neighbors that's already here before, right? So we have questions that we ask to the residents. What are the special places in Norwood that you think new neighbors need to know? And we have some quite interesting answers. Oh, that magnolia tree over there, or this is where we walk our dogs. So the idea is that new neighbors can have a cheat sheet where to meet other neighbors. And our map will be donated to Norwood Together, and it will be included in the welcome bag.
That's really
So
wonderful.
thank you, Kasley. It was really great. So at the beginning, we had a plan to create 4 different events where we can meet neighbors. It was called community council meetings. However, I heard that it wasn't, well attended, so we kind of pivoted into other venues. So we meet people where they are. So we went to the libraries, and then we also found out that the neighborhood is organizing a welcome dinner for new immigrants. So we sponsored that instead. So yes, a little bit pivoting here and there, but we have gathered all the information, and soon the map will be ready.
I love it. It's so creative and a really special way to make people feel welcome and to start building those relationships when they move to Norwood. That's really neat. So I'm curious, Dyah, your thoughts on kind of how those of us who are tackling social isolation and loneliness in all these different ways, but really want to make sure that we're empowering individuals like you who feel inspired, have an idea to take action. How would you recommend that we can help do that and really support people like you in this kind of work?
I'm so glad to hear all kinds of different background and people who have their ideas and were granted this grant. And I think without this grant, my idea is just an idea. I'm already busy. I have my full-time job and family. So this is just a nudge to make that happen. It helps also bringing community together. The sponsorship that we've given to the welcome dinner, it was excellent. And so yeah, I appreciate this kind of, this is like the grassroots of the grassroots, right? You don't have to go to any 501c3. You have an idea, let's help you make that happen. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I think there should be more of grants like this to communities.
Well, thank you so much, Dyah. And I think also, a lot of projects that people have ideas for don't necessarily need funding too. And I hope that people watching this come away also with the takeaway that it's really incumbent to all of us to take action in our communities. It can be as simple as being more friendly with our neighbors, reaching out to individuals who might be isolated, and really taking it upon ourselves to own this issue and to create the social norms that we want to exist in our communities. So thank you so much, Dyah, for sharing your story and example with us. And with that, I'd like to, we can go to the next slide to close up. Feel free to get in touch if this is of interest to you, but I will hand it back over to Jillian, and thanks again.